האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, good evening, Dobra Viecher. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parshas Vayigash. We're going to do Os test, section number 9. Before we begin, we're going to take a look at a pasuk that the Zera Shimshon begins the piece with. This is, of course, Parshas Vayigash, Perek Mem Vav Pasuk Aleph. And the pasuk is talking about when Yaakov Avinu left Eretz Canaan to go down to Mitzrayim. Pasuk says, Vayisa Yisrael v'chol asher lo, and Yisrael traveled along with everything that belonged to him. Vayovo be'era shava, and he came to Beer Sheva. On the way to Mitzrayim, he stopped at Beer Sheva. Vayizbach zevochim lelohei aviv Yitzchak, and he offered offerings to the God of his father Yitzchak. That's the pasuk, and now let's go right into the Zera Shimshon, Vayigash Os test, section 9. Pasuk, the pasuk says, Vayizbach zevochim lelokei aviv Yitzchak. Yaakov, on his way down to Mitzrayim, as we just read the pasuk, offered sacrifices to the God of his father Yitzchak. Perish Rashi. Rashi explained on that pasuk. Mikan, from here, from this pasuk, shechayav adam bichvod aviv, we learn that a person is more obligated to honor his father, yoser mikavod zekeno, more than the obligation he has to honor his grandfather. Ad kan lashono, until here is a quote from Rashi. So Rashi noticed in the pasuk that Yaakov offered offerings to the God of his father Yitzchak instead of to the God of his grandfather Avram Avinu. And Rashi deduced or learned out from there, extrapolated from there, that a person is more obligated to honor his father than his grandfather, and that's the reason that Yaakov honored his father by davening in his merit, by offering sacrifices and to the God of his father Yitzchak, mentioning his father Yitzchak rather than his grandfather Avram Avinu. The Zera Shimshon continues, Makshim ha'olam, the commentators ask on Rashi, Ma kushya hirgish Rashi b'pasuk zeh. What problem did Rashi feel about this pasuk? Did Dilma osas vochim lelohei aviv Yitzchak mibnei shahaya aviv? Perhaps Yaakov offered these offerings to the God of his father Yitzchak because, after all, Yitzchak was his father. It was a closer relationship. Velo mipnei hakavod, and not because there was a particular and specific obligation to honor his father Yitzchak more than his grandfather Avraham. So the question is, what compelled Rashi to learn out this obligation, this halacha, so to speak, that a person must honor his father before or more than his grandfather? Perhaps that's not what motivated Yaakov at all. Perhaps Yaakov was motivated to worship and offer sacrifices in the name of Elokei Aviv Yitzchak because Yitzchak was his father, and of course he had a closer relationship with his father than he did with his grandfather, and he was with his father when his father offered sacrifices more often, of course, than he was when his grandfather. So maybe Zera Shimshon says perhaps it was a natural thing for Yaakov to do, and Rashi would not need to learn out this particular, very specific halacha from this case. That's the question that the Zera Shimshon poses. And now he's going to begin to address that question in the next paragraph. Venira lomar, and it would appear to say, Dishapir hochiach Rashi, that Rashi correctly proved his point from this pasuk, Dechayov Adam v'chule, that a man is obligated to honor his father more than his grandfather, Mishum dekashile, because it was problematic to him Dehocha adarabba. Here in this pasuk, one would have expected the opposite. Yaakov lo hayulo lizboach, and we would have expected that Yaakov would not offer offerings eladafka leloke Abraham, but specifically to the God of his grandfather Abraham. Shahare ata hayaholech lemitzrayim. Yaakov, as we said, was on his way down to Mitzrayim. Lehaschil hashibud, to begin the servitude in Egypt, to begin the exile of the Jewish people in Mitzrayim that would ultimately lead to their being enslaved there. Shegozar HaKadosh Baruch Hu im Avraham. And this was based on a decree that Hashem had made with Avraham, with the words Yodoa Teda v'chule. You should surely know. This is a reference, of course, to the famous Bris Ben HaBesarim, the covenant of the pieces. V'Yaakov kodem sheyelech leMitzrayim asa zevachin. And Yaakov, before he would go to Mitzrayim, offered sacrifices. Kedei lehispalel leHakadosh Baruch Hu, in order to daven to Hashem sheyotziim misham, that he would take them out, that God would ultimately take out and rescue the Jewish people from Mitzrayim. So the idea of the Golus Mitzrayim, in the Avdus, the exile and the servitude in Mitzrayim, was paramount in Yaakov's mind as he began his trip down to Mitzrayim. And so he offered sacrifices with a very specific intent to daven that Hashem would ultimately bring the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim and rescue them from exile and servitude. Kimosha Amru Zichronim Livracha, as it is said in the Kabbalah, in the Zohar, Anochi Ered Imcha Mitzrayim ve'Anochi Alcha Gam Alo, that when Hashem said to Yaakov a few psukim after the pasuk that we read, in other words, in Vayigash, a few psukim past the pasuk that we read, Hashem says, I will go with you down to Mitzrayim and I will bring you up from there, meaning bring up the Jewish people from there. So in the Zohar, it says that pasuk, that statement by Hashem, that affirmation by Hashem was an answer to the tefillah that Yaakov made when he offered the sacrifices. Uchemoshe hivtiach la'Avraham, and this is similar to the promise that Hashem gave to Avraham back in the Bris Ben HaBesarim. V'gam es hagoy asher ya'avodu don anochi, and also the nation that the Jewish people will serve, I will judge. Ve'acharechein yetzu, and afterwards they will come out. So Hashem made that promise to Avraham back at the covenant of the pieces, and Hashem repeated that guarantee and that promise to Yaakov as an answer to Yaakov's tefillah at the time he offered the sacrifices. Ve'hakorban hazeh hayu lo lomar lelokei aviv Avraham. And therefore, when Yaakov brought the sacrifices in Beersheva on his way down to Mitzrayim, he should have said, we would have expected him to say, to the God of his father Avraham, meaning his grandfather Avraham. Why? Kedei sheyikayem HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma shehivtiach lo, in order that Hashem would keep the promise that he had made, would fulfill the promise he had made to Avram Avinu. Velama osa hakorban lelokei aviv Yitzchak. So why does the pasuk tell us that Yaakov, when he brought the korbanos, he brought them to the God of his father Yitzchak? Let's pause for a moment. In this paragraph, the Zera Shimshon explained to us that we would have expected Yaakov Avinu to bring the sacrifices to the God of his grandfather Avraham, because it was to Avraham that Hashem foretold the exile of the Jewish people in their future servitude. And it was to Avraham that Hashem promised that he would rescue and ultimately save the Jewish people and bring them out of their exile and their servitude. And so therefore, that would have connected to what was in Yaakov Avinu's mind, as it states in the Zohar. Yaakov Avinu davened when he brought the sacrifices that Hashem would in fact keep his promise to Avraham and bring up the Jewish people from their place of exile and their place of bondage. So therefore, it would have been very natural for him to mention Avraham and the God of Avraham when he brought the korbanos, but he did not do that. He mentioned the God of his father Yitzchak, and that's what got Rashi's attention. And so to speak, that's what bothered Rashi. As the Zera Shimshon continues to explain in the next paragraph. Elevadai muchrochim onu lomar. But definitely we are compelled to say, she'osa kain, that Yaakov Avinu did this, meaning he mentioned Elokei Aviv Yitzchak, the God of his father Yitzchak, when he brought his sacrifices, Bishvil Shechayov Odom Bichvod Aviv, because a man is obligated in the honor of his father to demonstrate kavod to his father, v'chule, etc., meaning more than his grandfather, as Rashi in fact explained on the pasuk. V'oso lo kavod zeh. And Yaakov did this act of honor for his father, lehispalel leHakodesh Baruch Hu sheyifte min hagolus bizchus Yitzchak, in order that he could daven to Hashem to redeem the Jewish people from exile in the merit of Yitzchak Avinu, his father. Hoil shemimenu hischil hagolus, because the exile began with Yitzchak Avinu. Kidichsiv, as the pasuk says, again a reference back to the bris bein habesarim, the covenant of the pieces that Hashem made with Avram Avinu. The pasuk says, "Your children will be strangers in a foreign land." Umiyom leidoso nishlamu arba meo shana, and from the day of Yitzchak Avinu's birth, you can count the 400 years that we were told. That Hashem told Abraham that the Jewish people would be in a type of exile and in a land that did not belong to them. Yitzchak, of course, was born in Eretz Canaan, but at that time the land did not belong to Abraham and to Yitzchak. It didn't belong to the Jewish people until Bnei Yisrael returned after their experiences in Mitzrayim. So the Zera Shimshon says Yaakov had very specific things in mind when he offered the sacrifices to the God of his father Yitzchak. One was to honor his father, as Rashi says, he's obligated to do so more than to honor his grandfather Avram Avinu. And in addition, he mentioned the God of his father Yitzchak because that also connected to his prayer of redeeming the Jewish people at the end of their 400-year exile, which began with the birth of Yitzchak. Now the Zera Shimshon, after giving that explanation and answering his question, and with that approach, is going to give us an additional answer, an additional approach that will explain again from another perspective why we would have expected Yaakov to mention Avraham rather than Yitzchak, and why in fact he mentioned Yitzchak. And we'll begin now in the next paragraph. V'od yesh lomar, and there is an additional answer that the Zera Shimshon wants to say. Sheyodua, it is well known, shetam golus Mitzrayim, the reason for the exile to Mitzrayim, hoyo lilaked kol hanitzotzos shenaflu sham. It was for the Jewish people to gather in all of the sparks that had fallen there. This is a reference that we've seen, this idea of sparks and gathering in the holy sparks, the nitzotzos kedusha. Kedusha is something, an idea and a concept we've seen several times in the Zera Shimshon, based on the Kabbalah, based on Kabbalistic concepts. And on its most simple level, which is all I can offer, it means that at the time of the original chait of Adam and Chava and the eating of the fruit of the Eitz Hadas, at that time there was a dispersal of holiness, of kedusha, dispersal of holy sparks that were absorbed by kochos hatuma that are referred to Kabbalistically as klipos, as the shells, and these holy sparks need to be redeemed. They need to be removed from the klipos, from the shells, and brought back to their holy source. And the Zera Shimshon is teaching us that was part of the concept behind the Hashem's concept of the Golus Mitzrayim, so that Bnei Yisrael could be in Mitzrayim and start gathering back and retrieving the holy sparks from that area of the world. V'zeh shekosuv vayelaket Yosef es kol hakesef. And this is the deeper meaning of what's written in the Torah when it says that Yosef, when he was the viceroy in Mitzrayim, he gathered up all of the money. He started gathering up all of the silver from the people. And that, in that simple context, the regular pshat there is that based on the years of famine, when Yosef had come up with, devised his plan and his strategy to collect wheat and grain and save it and then distribute it during the years of famine, to collect it during the years of plenty and then distribute it during the years of famine. So the people needed to buy grain from Yosef, and so he collected the money. But the understanding is that that's a reference to the fact that he was collecting holy sparks, these nitzotzos. As the sages of the true knowledge of Torah say, v'zehu besod shel, and this is also part of the deepest secret understanding behind the words vayinatzlu es Mitzrayim. When Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim, the pasuk says they emptied out Egypt. Asahu kimitzula, they made it like the deepest part of the ocean, she'ein ba dagim, where there are no fish. And again, the simple explanation is that they emptied out Egypt of gold and silver and other things because they went around, Moshe instructed them to go around and borrow all kinds of valuables and objects as they were preparing to leave Mitzrayim. But the Zera Shimshon says the deeper understanding of this is they emptied out Mitzrayim from all of the nitzotzos, all of the holy sparks that had originally been there. Next paragraph, top of the next page. Umishum hachi, and because of this, whose haru, they were warned in the Torah. There's a prohibition, in other words, in the Torah, shelo loshuv od b'Mitzrayim, not to return to Mitzrayim. The Torah proscribes returning to Mitzrayim after the Jews left there during Yetzias Mitzrayim. Lefi shelo nishar ba shum davar tov, because nothing good, no remnants of kedusha, of holiness, were left there, because the Jewish people emptied out the entire country of all of the holy remnants, the holy nitzotzos and sparks that were there, were all taken out when Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim. V'zehu hasod shel v'acharechein yetzu b'rechush gadol, and this is again the deep secret meaning of the pasuk. And afterwards they will leave with great wealth. Meaning, when Hashem said that, he not only meant that the Jews would leave with physical wealth, which of course they did, but also they would leave with great spiritual wealth, having collected during their years in Mitzrayim, starting with Yosef, having collected up all of the kedusha, all of the holy sparks that were there. Kemoshe herachnu la'el b'makomo, as we explained at length previously. V'af b'meseches psachim pei zayin, and even in Meseches Psachim on Daf pei zayin, Amrinon Chazal say, lo hagla v'chulei. The Gemara over there says the Jewish people were not put into exile, ela kadesha yitosvu, except in order to get the addition of converts. Jewish people went into exile in order to ultimately be able to have the converts who were fit and appropriate to rejoin the Jewish people, to have them come and add themselves to Bnei Yisrael. And the Gemara quotes a pasuk from Hosea there about planting, about Hashem planting Bnei Yisrael in the land. And the Gemara says, Klum Adam Zorea Sa'a v'chule. Does a person ever plant seeds unless he intends to reap more than he plants? If a person plants a certain amount of seeds, the only reason to do that would be in order to ultimately harvest many more seeds than he planted. And therefore, that's the same idea that Hashem put the Jews into exile in order to redeem them and have them come out with more people attached to them, with Gerim, with converts attached to them. This is a reference, or I should say a connection to this idea of emptying Mitzrayim of all of the holy sparks and also of all of the people whose neshamas Hashem originally intended to be part of the Jewish people. Next paragraph. Vehine ikar hachachona lanitzotzos, and the main preparation or preparatory work that was done for these sparks, sheyismashku min haklipos, that they could be removed and pulled out of the shells of impurity, also osam Avraham. That work was done primarily by Avram Avinu. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, v'es hanefesh asher osu v'choron. This is a reference back to Parshas Lech Lecha when Avram and Sarai were leaving their birthplace, and it says they took the souls that they had made in Choron. And as Chazal explained there, this is a reference to the people who they taught about monotheism and the values, the Torah values that they shared with these people. She'oz huchnu kol haneshamos ha'asidos lehiskayer. That at that time, they not only had people join them physically and actually at that time, but they also prepared the way, the road for all of the souls in the future who would convert to join the Jewish people. So Avraham was involved not just, and Sarah, they were involved not just with bringing people to join them at that time and at that place, but they were laying the groundwork for all future Gerim, for all future converts who would join the Jewish people throughout the ages. V'zeh sod ha-pasuk, and this is the deep, profound meaning of the pasuk, v'nivrechu v'cha, which in its simple meaning is translated is, and they and the nations of the world will be blessed through Avraham, from the idea of bracha, v'nivrechu, ha'omor ba'Avraham. That pasuk is said about Avraham. And now the Zera Shimshon is going to explain the deeper meaning. Milshon havrachas ha'ilon. This term, in a deeper level, refers to the bending of a tree. And that idea means that you can take a tree, certain kinds of trees, and you can bend them into the ground and then bury the tree, the part of the tree that's been bent and put in the ground. Now it's underground, and it will grow a new tree. A new tree will come up from the spot where the bent part of the tree, the bent branch has gone into the ground, has been brought in and buried in the ground. Ultimately, that new tree will become so independent that the connection to the original tree can be severed, and you'll now have two trees where originally you only had one tree, and that's called havrachas ha'ilon, the bending of the tree. And this is also, on a deeper level, what is meant by v'nivrechu v'cha. Through Avraham, the nations of the world will be bent, so to speak, and let's read what that means. Continuing, shekol hagerim minan havu. All converts who ultimately join the Jewish people originally were connected to the Jewish people. They were originally part of the Jewish people, v'nidchu, and they were dispersed. Just like when you do the havracha process with trees, you'll ultimately end up with a whole new tree, but it came from the original tree. Gerim were originally part of the tree of the Jewish people. They were separated from the Jewish people, but then they rejoined the Jewish people. V'ayin ba'orech be'asara ma'amoros ma'amar em kol chai. and see at length more about this idea in the Sefer Asara Ma'amoros, in the section entitled Aim Kol Chai, Simun Vav, Zayin V'Ches, in sections 6, 7, and 8. V'lochein Avraham Giyer Giyurim, and therefore Avraham converted many converts, and as the Zera Shimshon explained, laid the groundwork for all future converts. Yitzchak Afhu Giyer Giyurim, but Yitzchak also brought about the conversion of Gerim. Ki Isa b'Medrash, as it states in the Medrash on the pasuk Be'eretz Megure Aviv, that Yitzchak settled in the land of the wanderings of his father. The Medrash says Mi Giyure Aviv. He settled in the land of the conversions that his father had made, and he continued the work that Abraham started of converting people and teaching them about monotheism and the values of and mitzvos of Judaism. So let's pause here for a moment. So what the Zera Shimshon has now done is given us a second reason why we would have expected Yaakov, when he offered the sacrifices, to mention his grandfather Avraham rather than his father Yitzchak. And that reason is connected to Avraham's being primarily responsible for gathering in the sparks and for beginning the process of Gerus, which was connected to all future acts of conversion that would happen. And therefore, you would expect Avraham to be mentioned. However, Yaakov mentioned Yitzchak, and that was a second reason which led Rashi to learn out from this pasuk the idea that a person is obligated. In this case, Yaakov was obligated to honor his father Yitzchak more than his father Avraham. Continuing in the last paragraph, Umeata, from now that we understand all of these new ideas, Yaakov shahayu yodea shahalichoso l'Mitzrayim, Yaakov, who knew that his going to Mitzrayim was for the purpose of gathering in all these dispersed Jewish souls and all of these sparks of holiness, he offered sacrifices to Hashem, in order to give that Hashem would give strength and support to his children, to Yaakov's children and his descendants, lelaket hakol, to gather in everything that was in Mitzrayim. As we said before, over the course of all the years Bnei Yisrael were in Mitzrayim, their goal was to gather in all of the neshamos and the nitzotzos that they could. Umen haroi hoyu sheyomar leloke Avraham. And because Avraham started this kind of work, he was the founder of this kind of work, it would have been appropriate for Yaakov to mention the God of Avraham, shehu dafka tikein vehechin ezer v'siyua l'yitzias hanidochim bichlolusam, because Avraham specifically established and prepared the assistance and the support for bringing out the dispersed souls and the sparks in their entirety. That's the work that Avraham began, and he was the founder of that type of work. Even those people who would in the future, those non-Jews who would in the future convert and join the Jewish people, the Gerei Tzedek, the righteous converts. But since Yitzchak also had a role in this work, this conversion work, Tola Hazvachim b'Yitzchak, Yaakov made these sacrifices dependent upon the God of his father Yitzchak, Lefisha Chayov Odim Bichvod Aviv, because, as Rashi stated, a man is more obligated in the honor of his father, Yoser, more than his grandfather, V'chule, etc. So the Zera Shimshon once again has taken a pasuk that we can easily read when we do the Parsha and just kind of skim right over it. Yaakov brought sacrifices on his way down to Mitzrayim, and we might notice that it says he brought sacrifices to the God of his father Yitzchak, but perhaps we weren't struck by that the way Rashi was, and the way that the Zera Shimshon explains on a much deeper level why Rashi was bothered, for the two reasons that he explain, and why that led Rashi to teach the halacha that he taught in his commentary. Yasher koch to everyone for joining us in our learning of the Zera Shimshon this week, and we look forward, God willing, to learning Zera Shimshon again next week.